Hello, welcome to vlog number 10, and this week I was asked to read chapter 8 of the Rhetorical Act as well as chapter 3 of Reading Pop Culture. So to start off, chapter 8 of the Rhetorical Act is titled Challenges Arising from Audiences, and it starts off by stating that whether or not your subject and purpose creates challenge is dependent partly on the nature of your audience. Therefore, the audience has a huge impact on your message. Challenges are only obstacles if the audience perceives them in such a way. And it also defines rhetorical context into relationships, asking questions such as what will be necessary to induce the audience to take part in rhetorical action? What does the subject or purpose demand of the audience? Or what demands are made of the credibility of the rhetor by the subject or purpose and the audience? So the textbook goes on to define two errors that rhetors commonly make. The first being that they assume that audiences, particularly classmates, colleagues, friends, are just like themselves and with the same experiences, values, religious beliefs, political affiliations, and life goals. And that is not the case because all audiences need explanation, adaptation, and effort to see the importance of the issue and the purpose. The second common error is that they transform the audience into a vicious monster that is eagerly waiting to boo them off the stage and to discredit their message. While this may be true and you may encounter hostile audiences, it does not mean that necessarily every audience is going to be like that. Especially, it will be harmful on the rhetor if they perceive the audience in such a way. The goal of the rhetor is to avoid these two errors and to recognize differences between themselves and the members of the audience to create common ground between them. So there are four types of audiences. The first being the empirical audience, which are those that are exposed to the Rhetorical Act directly. For example, MS Magazine, its empirical audience are feminists or women that support that. The second type of audience is the target audience, which is the ideal audience whom the act is aimed towards. So, for example, razor and aftershave ads, they're played during football games because a study done by Nielsen found that the majority of the viewers are male. There are agents of change, which is a VIP audience consisting of those who have the capacity or the resources to do what the rhetor wishes and to make change. So rhetors aim towards people with political power, economic power, or the resources to act. So, for example, religious leaders, politicians, teachers, parents, judges. The last type of audience is the created audience, which is the role the audience is invited to play by the rhetor. So advertising, it creates appealing scenarios that invite us to imagine ourselves playing roles in them. It's more of an emotional appeal. Lastly, this chapter talks about audience-related rhetorical challenges. The first being inattention, so insulated from exposure. Audiences, they selectively expose themselves to messages and they selectively attend to those they see or hear. And in other words, we expose ourselves to messages that meet our physiological, psychological, or social needs. For example, women that are about to be married, they might seek out brides magazines and bridal shops and all of that. The second type of audience-related challenge is misperception, which is stereotyping or distortion. Selective perception is the human ability to function like a radio. So we're able to tune one channel in and tune the other out. We're able to turn up the volume, and we also have access to turn the radio off completely. The third type of audience-related rhetorical challenge is the lack of motivation. No salience. People expose themselves to messages that they believe to be useful to satisfy their needs. The textbook talks about Maslow's needs of hierarchy, starting with physiological needs such as hunger and thirst, and ending in self-actualization, so creating an identity for yourselves, cultural beliefs, all of that. Values, they're just judgments about what is moral, important, or beautiful, and they can arise from three different sources: our biology, our culture, and our individualism. And they arise from our needs, so there is a strong relationship between our needs and our values. The last audience-related issue is inertia, which is the resistance to change, aka being powerless. So the general definition of inertia is the tendency of an object to continue doing whatever it's originally doing. But when applied to literary, inertia is an audience's resistance to the writer's purpose. So audiences, they will resist changing their ideas and ignore calls for action unless proposed action is both vital enough to engage their energies as well as within their capabilities, capable of being done here and now, and has a reasonable chance of being effective. That is all that is mentioned in Chapter 8 of the Rhetorical Act. Now to move on to Chapter 3 of Reading Pop Culture, which is titled Technology: How do new devices and apps transform experience? So to start off, I would like to state a quote that is on page 137 that summarizes what this chapter is about. Americans tend to be optimistic about technology and progress. That idealism shapes contemporary life in innumerable ways, from the convenience of our consumer products and the limitless information of our internet search engines to our relationships with friends, money, education, jobs, and culture. So in the first essay by Saval, Wall of Sound, the iPod has changed the way we listen to music. The history of music in relation to the work of Theodor Adorno is explored to illuminate the meaning of music in a shuffled world. So by applying what we learned in Chapter 8 of the Rhetorical Act, I will be analyzing the types of audiences that I found in each one of these essays. And within this essay, I was able to find all of the audiences through one specific quote, stating on page 140, most iPod-like devices separate citizens from one another. You can't join someone in a movement if you can't hear the participants. Congrats, Mr. Jobs, for impeding social change. So he's making reference to Steve Jobs. So the empirical audience, those that are exposed to the Rhetorical Act, it is the younger generation that participates in this popular music and the technological advances, such as the iPod. And lastly, the target audience, it is, those who are aimed to indulge in these new technologies and to call action towards social impact rather than individualism. In Postman's The Judgment of Themis, Postman motivates us to view the world within open eyes. And on a quote on page 166, it states, new technologies alter the structure of our interests, the things we think about. They alter the character of our symbols, the things we think with, and they alter the nature of the community, the arena in which thoughts develop. So Postman establishes the empirical audience as what he calls a technophile, which is defined as a one-eyed prophet who sees only what new technologies can do and are incapable of imagining what they will undo. So that is the empirical audience. The target audience and the agents of change are aimed towards society as a whole, reflecting on the good and the bad of technological advancements. And within Shirky's Gin, Television, and Social Surplus, Shirky views society as stumbling through the process of technological transformation in an optimistic way, answering questions such as, what does technology mean? How does it mean? In what ways does it alter human psychology, relationships, privacy, culture, and entertainment? So on page 173, quote saying, when people ask about me, what we're doing, and when I say we, I mean the larger society trying to figure out how to deploy this cognitive surplus, but I also mean we, especially the people in this room, the people who are working hammer and tongs at figuring out the next good idea. Shirky defines her audience within this quote, calling for action to deploy cognitive surplus towards technology positivity. So in this, it's not really an essay, it's more of a transcript of a speech that Shirky had performed. And her audience, her empirical, her target, and her agents of change, all three audiences were the people in that room. And she had given that speech at a technological event. So people in the audience were people that were very involved with technology and technological advancements, like engineers, business affiliates, all of that. And lastly, in Blyer's Love the one you're near. Blyer examines dating apps such as Tinder, Grindr, and Bumble to question whether long-term partners can be found by flicking through a river of pictures on smartphones. So I want to quote on page 138 stating whether long-term partners can be found by flicking through a river of pictures on a smartphone. The empirical and target audiences are established, and it is those who engage in these dating apps. So, Blyer, he calls for a kinder way of use, especially talking about the geosocial aspect of matchmaking and how it spurs depersonalization, and it doesn't really call for a connection between two people. Lastly, the agents of change are aimed towards the creators of these apps, calling for revoking this geosocial feature, claiming that it is the least important aspect and that it promotes casual sex rather than social positivity and connection. That is all for vlog number 10. Thank you.